Hi, in this video we're going to look at modal verbs of deduction, or Sherlock Holmes modal verbs, in the past. And a great way of doing this with your students is to play this game. Okay? In England we call it Cluedo. In America it's just referred to as Clue. Now if you've never heard of this game before, someone is dead. Now I'm going to come away from the rules of the game to explain my grammar point here. Have a look at the game, it's a fantastic game. But in my story, this is Professor Plum, and as you can see from my fantastic artwork, he's dead. And last night, so let's put in, last night, so it's in the past, Professor Plum was murdered with the revolver in the conservatory. And we have three suspects. Okay, we have Reverend Green, we have Colonel Mustard, and we have Mrs. Peacock. Okay, so those are the three suspects in my story. And the police arrive and they have to ask each of these three about what they did the night before and try to find out who the murderer was. Now right now we don't know. It could be any of these three people. So can you remember which modal verb we use to talk about possibility? And you should be answering with the modal verb might. So we can say that Mrs. Peacock might, and here is where it's different. Notice that when we did the present, it was might and the infinitive. When we come into the past, we have to use might, have, and then verb 3. And might have murdered Professor Plum. So your structure is going to be your subject, then your modal, and then have with verb 3. Okay? So murder, murdered, murdered. Eat, ate, eaten. Yeah? Okay, so we don't know right now, but we interview Reverend Green. And Reverend Green says that he was with Miss Scarlet in the ballroom when we heard the gunshot. So now, and Miss Scarlet says, yes, he was with me. Sexy couple, let's not ask. Okay, but they were together. So now we can work out that it's unlikely that Reverend Green committed the murder because Miss Scarlet says they were together. Remember, you should always put a because when you're making a guess. So if we're looking at impossible, is it impossible? No, they could be lying. So don't forget that. Okay? Or very unlikely, then you should remember that we use can't. In this case, because we're talking about the past, we can also use couldn't. So we would say that Reverend Green, let's do this in blue. Reverend Green can't or couldn't have murdered Professor Plum because, and then he was with Miss Scarlet in the ballroom. So right now we still have two suspects. We have Mrs. Peacock and we have Colonel Mustard. Do we know who did it? No, we don't. But we know that he didn't do it. Or we think that he didn't do it. So they ask Mrs. Peacock. And she says she was with Dr. Orchid in the dining room. And Dr. Orchid says, yes, we were having dinner when this happened. So now we can say Mrs. Peacock can't or couldn't have murdered Professor Plum because she was in the dining room with Dr. Orchid. So this person didn't do it. This person didn't do it. What can we work out about Colonel Mustard? They ask Colonel Mustard and he says, I can't remember where I was. Okay, so we know it wasn't him. We know it wasn't her. We can work out that it must have been. So Colonel Mustard, terrible joke, must have murdered Professor Plum. Because it wasn't Mrs. Peacock, it wasn't Reverend Green, he can't remember where he was. We are looking at all of the evidence together and we are making a guess. And remember that we are not saying that he did it, because we don't know. Maybe later they will find out more about the story. But looking at this evidence, looking at what I told you, this is how we make guesses using modal verbs of deduction. There are practice activities contained below this video if you need a little bit of extra practice. But the next time that you don't know something, start looking at the evidence and start making guesses. And I'll be back very soon with another in the Intermediate Grammar Go-Getter course. Take care.